Hello and welcome to Whitehorse Music TV! My name is Richard Budina and I am co-owner of this wonderful shop with my lovely wife who is not behind the camera today. She's at home looking after munchkins. Today is a very exciting day because finally I am going to be comparing lots and lots of different cello strings all on the same cello by the magic of television. In fact, I'm going to be putting one set of strings on this cello and then I'm going to change those strings, but you won't have to wait for that change of strings. You'll just see me going on straight on to the next set of strings and you'll hear the difference between those two different types of strings on exactly the same cello, and I'll go through lots and lots of different cello strings and it'll be very exciting. I actually did this video, same sort of video, for violin strings a couple of years ago, and it has been very popular because violin strings are very expensive and it's nice for people to hear the difference before they buy them. But cello strings are really, 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 really expensive, unless you buy them at whitehorsemusic.hello, in which case they're still expensive, but maybe not quite as much. Yeah, it's really good to hear them first before you plunge into buying the expensive strings. So I'm going to go through all of those different strings. At the end, I'm going to show you some combinations of sets, because there's some sets that work well together and some that don't. And so at the very end of the video, you'll hear each of those sets one after another. But for the moment, I'm going to show you the individual sets, and I'll tell you what I think my 16 years of experience of changing thousands of cello strings, I'll be able to give you an idea of what is good and what is not for particular cellos. The strings that I will be reviewing today will include the jargars, the jargar superior, the Larsen soloist, Pirastro in fact, Pirastro gold, Pirastro obbligato, Pirastro perpetual, Pirastro piranito, Diodario helicore, Diodario Kaplan, and I will be doing combination sets. Do not miss out on these combination sets, they're incredible. Spirocore along with Larsen, then there'll be Spirocore Pirazzi and Larsen, and then there'll be Magnacore and Larsen. Do not miss out on those final sets, they are where it's at. Now, the jargar cello strings, they've been around for ages, since 1956, a long time. And I remember when we first started the shop, almost 17 years ago, jargar strings were on just about every student cello. They were just everywhere. They were a nice, sort of mellow, warm sounding string, which was good for most people who were on student cellos, because a lot of the time student cellos are not nice and warm sounding. They can be a bit scary, especially on the A string. They can sort of be really tinny and bright and nasty sometimes. So jargar strings were reasonably affordable, but they were nice and mellow and good. They have actually changed a little bit over the years. I find the A string now to be not as sort of round and mellow as it used to be, a little bit sort of brighter, which is fine. I mean, it brings it right into the middle of the spectrum. So this is what the jargar strings sound like on this cello, which happens to be a Strina Maestro cello. So they have depth, they ring a bit, they are slightly not as full as they used to be, but still quite nice. And they still have a bit of a ring to them. They're a really good sort of affordable string. One thing that people used to do, they used to use, because there weren't many options, they would use these jargar strings on all of the fractional size cellos as well, right down to 8th size cellos. and they weren't made in those sizes, so they would be cutting down these big strings. And what that does is you end up with big strings on the little cellos. There's not enough tension in the string, and so the strings end up sort of feeling and sounding like rubber bands. They're like blah, 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 like that, and it was ridiculous. And then I started using another brand of string, which I'll get to later, to sort of combat that. But now Jargar have brought out these young talent strings in different sizes. So they're in smaller sizes, and they're a little bit cheaper as well. So that is a good option for smaller strings as well. But Jargar strings, they get a thumbs up. All right, next up we have Jargar Superior. So about a year ago, Jargar, which I played before, they came out with a new one called Jargar Superior, which is in a couple of price ranges up. So it's more in the price range of some of the popular, more expensive ones like Larsen and Eva Perazzi and some of those sort of more expensive ones. And I thought, are they just going to come out with something that copies a Larsen because Larsen are so popular? And turns out, no, they're very different. They're really good though. But the Jargar Superiors are the reason that we used the Struna Maestro in this video, because they said, sorry, I am too good for any of your student cellos. I am Jargar Superior, which I think is a great name for a cello string. So let's give them a bit of a try, see what we think. There you go. So, Jargar Superior, they're so much more dynamic than the standard Jargar strings, especially on the C string. The C string is sort of much brighter. There's a couple of combination sets that we'll look at later where a lot of professionals will try to make their bottom strings brighter by using a particular bright set on the bottom and more warm on the top. Because the thing is, the bottom strings on a cello sometimes can get too sort of muddy sounding because they're very deep, where the top strings can get a bit sort of screechy. The Jargar Superior, in contrast to the normal Jargars, has a lot of brightness and a bit of grit and a lot of strength on the bottom strings, which really clears that up. And it's pretty much what professional cello players often want, depending on their cello. But the other thing is, it's got quite a bit more ring. So that's just sort of continuing on. Yeah, but the thing that impresses me most is a change in volume and also a change in the vibrancy, especially on the bottom strings. So they definitely get a thumb up as well. Next up, we have Larsen strings. Now, I like Larsen strings. I'm going to try to not bring that across too much. Hang on, I held up Larsen solo. These are Larsen strings. Okay, Larsen strings, standard Larsens. I did put on standard Larsens, didn't I? Yep, these are standard Larsen strings. Okay, so Larsen strings, they've been around for a long, long, long time. It doesn't say on the packet, but a long, long, long time. They have this sound that I want on a lot of cellos, and a lot of cello teachers want that sound on a lot of cellos as well. They have a lot of warmth on the top two strings, especially the A string, which makes them a very used string in combination with other sets. So often you'll get, two Larsens on the top and then two something else on the bottom. But the set of Larsens itself is a really good option for a lot of cellos because of that sort of warmth at the top, and because the bottom is mellow, but it's not too mellow, so it's not too muddy. I'll give them a bit of a play, see what you think. Yeah, I love them. And they have ring, but not, huge amounts of ring. They have mellowness, they have evenness. That's what they have. They're very even across the entire set. And I just love them. But listen, that A string by itself, instead of being it's more like ah, and it's wonderful for a lot of cellos. I can't speak highly enough of Larsen strings. I would speak maybe slightly higher of them if they were $1 per set, and then I would just speak really highly of them. But they are wonderful, and they get several thumbs up. If I had more thumbs, I'd give them. Next up, we have Larsen solo strings. So the Larsen solo, it's actually just the top 3 strings which are different. So you've got the green, little tiny bit of green winding just up the top there. And that's all that's different about them, absolutely nothing else. It would be funny actually if that was the only difference. I reckon people would still come in and say, I've got to have the Larsen solo, they are so much better. Because, sometimes when things are more expensive, they make you think, maybe they are better. But yes, they are different. So the top 3 strings only are different. It's the normal Larsen C string that comes in that Larsen soloist set. So the difference really is the top 3 strings seem to be quite a bit more sort of focused. They're possibly stronger, more focused, but not necessarily for every cello. Let's have a play. Okay, there you go. So definitely once I got onto the D, but more so when I went across to the A string, it sounded sort of more focused, more sort of projecty and strong and cutting. But that's not necessarily a good thing for every cello. You might want to go back and compare that to the normal Larsen A string, which is a little bit fuller sounding. So it'll depend on the cello as to whether it all sort of naturally has sort of like a full A string sound. If it does have a very full A string sound, then the Larsen solo will give it a bit more sort of oomph and a bit more sort of strength and cutting power. But if you already have a cello that has a very sort of strong focused A string, this will make it more strong and focused and can end up making it sound a bit painful. So it's not necessarily better or worse. I just think it's a different sort of a thing, but definitely a useful addition to my sort of repertoire of cello strings that I can advise to people. So they're fantastically awesome, like the standard Larsens, just a little bit different. They get the thumbs up as well. All right, next up we have Eva Pirazzis, Pirastro Eva Pirazzis. So it's a great string to do straight after the Larsen solo ones, because we've just gone a little bit brighter than the standard Larsens, and Eva Pirazzis are like an explosion of brightness. They're one of the strings that are very similar in their violin string equivalent, the Eva Pirazzi violin strings. They're just really, really bright and strong and soloisty. There's a couple of things that I have to talk to you about with the Eva Pirazzi strings though. First of all is response. I haven't talked about that with the other strings. The Larsens, they respond a little bit quicker than the jargars, but the Eva Pirazzi, I reckon they're even quicker again. So coming from a violin playing background, when I started playing cello, I would find I would be exhausted after 5 minutes of playing the cello, just because it's such an effort getting those thick strings moving. There's also the fingering, but the bowing, I would just be exhausted in no time. But some strings respond quicker, so they just don't take as much effort to get the string moving. And that's one of the great things about Eva Pirazzi strings. Different cellos can have different response as well. You find some cellos you really have to work hard to get the sound out, others not so much, but the strings can have an effect on that, so that's something really important. The other thing that's really interesting with Eva Pirazzis is they have a little bit more string hiss than some other strings. String hiss is like this sort of like background noise, which for most people it's fine. Like they don't necessarily hear it, or it doesn't affect them and they're not worried. Some people, when they first play Eva Pirazzi strings, will hear that string hiss and be like, there's something wrong with my string, something wrong with the cello. But it's not, it's just, they're a little bit different. There's also, with Eva Pirazzi strings and with other strings, sometimes you get ones that have a little bit more hiss than others. And I have a friend who actually, we put on some Eva Pirazzi strings on her cello, and she was like, oh, that's completely different to my old Eva Pirazzi strings. And then we changed to another set of Eva Pirazzi strings, same strings, and she said, oh, that's fine. So, they do vary a little bit, but there are two interesting things about Eva Pirazzi strings that you have to take into account. But I'll give them a bit of a play. There you go. Could you hear that massive amount of ring on the top strings? Now that is awesome. Like, yeah, you want that. I remember playing a violin that was valued at $300,000 quite a while back, and it had so much of that ring naturally in the violin that it sort of filled the whole shop. And I think that's part of the technology of those old instruments, those old violins and cellos, and why they're so sought after, because they can fill the big concert halls because they have so much of that ring. These strings add to that ring, and I think that's really great. Now, they're not the string for every cello. The A, in comparison to the Larsens and the string that I'm comparing to at the start, those jargars, the A is sort of thinner. It's got much more of a projecty edge to it. And so for some student cellos, that might be, something that sends it over the edge and makes it a cutting sounding cello. And in fact, Graham, who works here, the other luthier, he calls them evil piranhas because, they're just so cutting. They're really bitey little things, and they can tear bits off your body, and they're gross. But they're, evil piranhas. I mean, they're really strong, really bitey, really ringy, and they're great soloist strings, so definitely worth giving a go if you have a cello which is not already too sort of bright and cutting. Otherwise, you might turn them into evil piranhas. Do not do that. Oh, but they get thumbs up, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm not getting tired of changing strings. Next up, we have Eva Pirazzi gold strings. And they are nice and gold down there. So the Eva Pirazzi gold ones, they came out fairly recently, a year or two ago. Originally, we had Eva Pirazzi violin strings and obbligato violin strings. And the Eva Pirazzis were really, really bright. And the obligatos were much more mellow and relaxed and dark sounding. And people, wanted something in between, so they made Eva Pirazzi gold violin strings. And then more recently, they've done pretty much the same with cello strings. So you got Eva Perazzi, which are really bright and strong and ringing, as you have just heard. And then you got Obbligato, which sort of mess it up a little bit because they are warm and mellow, but not anywhere near the degree of the equivalence of the violin strings. They are nice and warm, reasonably warm and mellow, and a little bit sort of bright on the A string. But the effect of the Eva Perazzi Gold is still what it was with the violin strings. They are like a fuller sounding version of the standard Eva Perazzi strings. They still have that ring, they still have that cut, but they're a little bit sort of fuller sounding. I'll play them for you, see what you think, and you can tell me. There you go. I think that C string is sort of rounder and fuller and not as confrontational as the Eva Perazzi standard strings. The A string still has ring. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same amount of ring as the standard Eva Perazzi's. I don't think so. They're still very, very ringy strings. And a little bit sort of fuller sounding. I think they're a really great addition. I think they will suit probably more cellos than the standard Eva Perazzi's because they're not as fiery and evil piranha-y, but they are still really strong, awesome soloist strings that project and have some sort of thickness about them. So gosh, they get the thumbs up. They do cost money though. Obbligato strings. All right, so obbligato cello strings. Now they are an interesting one, and they are actually one that don't really work for me so much because I've come from that violin playing background. The obbligatos, they are very thick strings, not just in sound but also the D string. I was just comparing the thickness of that D string to the D string of the Eva Perazzi Gold set that I just took off, and it is much, much thicker. It seems to be a lot more of a weight to get going for myself, and so they don't work as well for me. But that's just for me. There are some cellos where I would use these strings. Cellos where you're struggling to get fullness and depth and richness on the bottom three strings especially, because it really does, it's almost sort of artificially bringing those extra parts of the sound spectrum out, but they come at a little bit of a cost to the response, which, because I've just played Eva Perazzi and Eva Perazzi Gold, which really respond well, it's even more of a difference for me. I'll give them a bit of a play. So that is really, really full sounding, especially on the bottom three strings. The other thing that doesn't really work for me that much is the A string, to me, is almost like it's from another set. It's sort of like quite bright and strident. It's a little bit more sort of sound. where the and it maybe shows up more because those bottom three strings are so sort of round sounding, and so when you get onto that A string, it may be, you know, it's a bit of a surprise. But there are some cellos that would work for. Cellos where you have your sort of like wolfy big area around the open A string, and I could imagine this sort of allowing you to cut through that on the open on the open string on the top, while allowing the bottom strings to have more sort of richness and fullness. So it'll work for some. It doesn't necessarily work for me, but I mean, they are good quality professional level strings. I don't want to bag them too much because they are really good strings, but not necessarily for me. They get some thumbs up. Next up, we have perpetual strings. Pirastro perpetual strings. Say that 100 times. Pirastro perpetual strings. Now, these came out fairly recently, and I was very excited because they were new strings, and it's very exciting for a person like me. I don't get out much, but so these perpetual strings. Once I got over the price tag, I put them on a cello, and they were really, really strong. They were sort of like the Eva Perazzi strings, and sort of like the Larsen strings, and sort of like a combination. They were really, really strong, and had this sort of dynamic thing going on the top strings that I hadn't necessarily heard as much before. I'll play them for you. I'll show you I'll show you what they sound like. There's all this sort of like strength it makes you want to play up the fingerboard. They're so sort of dynamic. So really, really strong, really dynamic, even like the Larsen strings, almost like the perfect string. But when you compare them to the Larsens, the one sort of, you know, back pedal that I have is that maybe they have a slightly plasticky sound about them, only slightly, and that's such a mild criticism that they are, I mean, just a fantastic string, really, really good. I would say as far as ring goes, they have more ring than, say, the Jargars and the Larsens, but maybe not as much as the Eva Perazzi. They sustain quite well. Yeah, really good strings. Yeah, go out and buy them if you have that money. Pirastro Piranito strings. I reckon with a name like that, they should be top of the range. Piranito! But no, they are the starting model of the Pirastro range. So you find a lot of these strings, they're sort of dark bluish, or medium bluish. You find a lot of these at in school programs and that sort of thing because they're not too expensive. One really good thing about Piranitos is they seem to be really hardy. They can live for a long time, maybe a little bit difficult to break, but they're less likely than some other strings for the winding to start coming apart, and I reckon that's really good and important for school programs and that sort of thing. Now, the sound of them, I'll play them first and then I'll tell you what I think. there you go. I don't know how well your speakers are going to interpret this sound, but the bottom 3 strings were reasonably nice and warm and even. When it got to the top string, that's almost like the personification of that sort of sound. It's not it's, you know, usually cellos will come with a set of strings when they come from the manufacturer, which we call factory strings, which are just put on in the factory. They sound absolutely horrendous, and shops will generally, well, specialty cello shops will throw out those strings and put on good strings, any of these strings sort of thing. These strings are 100 times better than those factory strings, but that A string gives you an idea of the direction in which the factory strings are heading. You know, if you're heading towards factory strings, you're getting more of that sort of, it's a metallic sort of edge to the A string, and it's not necessarily fantastic for, you know, student cellos and a lot of the ones that they have at schools and that sort of thing. So you do get that sort of squawky sound on a lot of school instruments, and more so because they're using these strings. But, you know, it is, you have to balance up money. You have to balance up the fact that these are cheaper, which is great. They also last longer, which is great. So they're cheaper again, really. So they're really good hardy strings. And as they get older, they do warm up a little bit on the A string. So that is good. Probably, you know, my least favourite, I would say, of all of those strings, but also, you know, the least expensive and probably just about the longest lasting. It's interesting that with cello strings, the more expensive they are doesn't necessarily mean they're going to last longer or you're less likely to break them. It's almost the opposite sometimes. So they definitely get a thumbs up as being a very useful string in some conditions. All right, we're up to a different brand. We have Diodario Helicore strings on this cello. What a cute little combination of colours they are there. Now, these are very familiar to me because I use them on a lot of our cellos. I used to use a lot of jargars to start with, back when they only made full size. And earlier I mentioned that a lot of people were putting those full size jargar strings on little cellos because it was just about the only option you had for smaller cellos. I found Helicore fractional size strings, so I started using them a lot more. And I found their Helicores to be a little bit brighter and more sparkly sounding than the jargars. And that suited my cellos a little bit more. I just thought it gave them a little bit more oomph. And so I was really happy with that. And then I had a cello teacher say to me, I've had a couple of Helicore strings, cello strings, and they've actually been banjo strings. It's like, what on earth are you talking about? But I thought, maybe that's happened, or maybe she's gone around the twist a bit. But then I myself got a couple of banjo cello strings. So you'd play it and it would just be completely wrong. Like just, it would be on, like where it's usually mellow on the D string, it would just suddenly be, and you felt like just grabbing it like a banjo, putting some, you know, some straw between your teeth and just playing it like a banjo. It was that banjo-y. But that was years ago, and the Helicores have been a lot more consistent since then. So they're like, I use them for a lot of our cellos. The only downside to the Helicore strings now, really, in their price range, I reckon, is the A string can be a little bit cutting. It used to, I reckon, be usually a little bit sort of warmer on the top than it is now. So that's my only criticism, but I'll give it a bit of a play, show you. for their price range, I reckon they're really like, you know, full and strong. They're also very robust as well. They're, what are they? They're steel core strings, and really difficult to break. So yeah, they've been really, really good for us. Yeah, that's the only thing, not to the degree of the Pirastro strings that I played before. I reckon that A string is just a little bit more metallic and a little bit thinner sounding than I want it to be for the remainder of this set. And this is where, you know, combined sets can come in really handy. It's not uncommon for me on slightly little bit better student cellos to be using helicore strings on the bottom three and maybe a Larsen string on the A string. That really works for me some of the time. But I mean, they're a fantastic string and well worth using. Yes, they get a thumbs up. All right, next up we have Diodario Kaplan strings. And I can tell you right now, you cannot complain about these strings. See, this is where I go with my humour. I go where other people are afraid to tread. Kaplan, you can't complain about that. Oh my gosh, how impressive. I should probably tidy up the strings as I'm going. Get out of the way. All right, well, Kaplan strings. So I reckon Kaplan strings are sort of like what I want helicore strings to be. They are really even. Really even, and they're really strong, like the helicores, really, you know, vibrant and everything. But the A string, compared to the helicore that I played just before, has that fullness that I want. I reckon they're a really nice, even set that you could use on a lot of cellos and feel very safe that it's going to sound good. I'll play them for you. Just broad, nice, full sounding, very similar in a way to the Larsens. I reckon the Larsens are the other set of strings that, to me, they feel sort of even across all the different strings on most cellos. So a very useful string. My only complaint as far as being a violin player goes, I reckon they feel a little bit too high tension for me. I know they are a bit higher tension than the helicores, and so my fingers do get a little bit annoyed pretty quickly. But I have a talk to them. I give them a nice hot bath, take them out to dinner, and it's okay. See, I go there with the humour. That's where I go. But yeah, these strings are great. If you are a strong cello player and you have the hands that can handle it, then they are as good as any string. Definitely worth using. Get a good thumbs up, that one. Now, thank you for waiting all the way through to the combination strings. Combination strings, you can get just amazing sounds out of a cello with some of these combinations. Now, this first combination that I'm going to show you are Spirocore Tungsten strings on the bottom two strings, on the C and the G, and Larsen, just standard Larsen medium strings on the top two strings, the D and the A. Now, the plan with this set of strings is that the Larsens are very mellow, very beautiful, still very open strings on the top two strings. The standard Larsen set also has very nice, even, mellow strings on the bottom two strings, but sometimes you want something that cleans up the bottom two strings. You want it to sound, brighter, and so more easy to hear the difference between the notes if you're playing fast on the bottom strings and that sort of thing. So these Spirocore strings, the Spirocore Tungsten strings, are really clear and really strong and really ringing and really sort of voluptuous and fat sounding, and they're just awesome on the bottom. But you wouldn't want that brightness and strength also necessarily on the top, so that you get the Larsens on the top for that. And so that combination is really great, but it's not only sort of like clearing up the bottom and then making the top sort of luscious and full. It's also that the strength of the Spirocore strings transfers over to those Larsens. So they ring in sympathy with the Larsen strings as you're playing the top two, and the Larsen strings suddenly they ring more, and they're they sustain and they ring. They're still the same strings, but they're being heightened by the fact that you're using these other strings on the bottom there, and it's just a great combination. I'll play it for you. Amazing. I see this set used by more professionals than any other set, any other combination set. That bottom string is just like a cannon. It explodes, and it continues that onto the G string. So those two strings, really, really strong, full, vibrant, quick to respond, awesome. And now the A string on the Larsen. Now it's ringing like an Eva Pirazzi string, except it's fuller. It's really full sounding. So you've just got an amazing set across that. I've played these in a bit, but when you first put them on, it can be very, very scary. The Spirocore strings are like any other string. They can vary a little bit. You can get slightly brighter ones and slightly less bright ones. If you get really bright ones, sometimes you'll be playing your C scale. You play up to there, and it's all been really, really bright and sparkly, and then suddenly it's like dead, and it just seems really weird. But you just have to wait for a few weeks. It takes a few weeks to properly play them in, and they get closer and closer to merging until suddenly you are left with a set that works really well on most cellos. So I'm not saying it works on every cello. And the other thing is, Spirocores are extremely scary, and you do get people who you put these strings on their cello, and they have a lot of string hiss, a lot of noise, and the people flip out and say, "Get those strings off my cello," and they start running around and trashing the shop and that sort of thing. And once you've calmed them down and given them some injections of Valium and stuff, then you put other strings on their cello because they're not up for that sort of sound. But they are a wonderful combination. I'll go on to the next combination now. Oh, just so awesome. They get like 100 thumbs up if I had that many. All right, this next set is another combo, and what I've done is I've only changed one string. I've changed the D string from a Larsen to an Eva Pirazzi string. So now what I was doing before was I had the two Spirocores on the bottom, which make this huge, bright, strong sound, and then I had a sudden contrast to the Larsens on the top, which are warm, full, mellow. But after a period of time of playing in, they worked really, really well together. Now this is a little bit of a speed up in a way, because the Eva Pirazzi to me sounds between the extreme brightness and grittiness of the Spirocore strings and the mellowness of the Larsen string on the top. So instead of getting sort of half a scale of scariness and half a scale of mellowness, which is fine because it does play in and it's fine, but instead of having that, you get a much smoother transition over from the brightness of those to a slightly little bit less bright and then to less bright again. And it works really well. Have a listen. So that's just an awesome set. Yeah, really, really strong and not too scary a transition. So a very, very good set for professional players. Does cost money. Got to say it does cost money, but is worth it. It gets like 600 thumbs just, you know, going up. The final set of strings for today are a combination set of the Larsen Magnacore and the Larsen medium standard strings on this cello. Now, how annoying would it be for Larsen? They have made these wonderful strings, the Larsen set of strings, and suddenly people started pairing them with those Spirocore strings on the bottom. And Larsen would have been thinking, well, but we make the bottom strings as well. Why don't you use our ones? But a lot of the professional players started using those Spirocore, the Thomastik Spirocore strings instead. So Larsen, quite rightly, they decided, right, we're going to be part of that, and they called the strings Magnacore, which Spirocore, Magnacore, not that much difference to the name really. There's a Magna there. But they made them, I reckon, pretty similar, and they've done an amazing job. Thumbs up to Larsen, nice work. So I'll give these a play, and then you can decide whether you think this combination or the Spirocore Larsen combination is better. I'll play both. I'll play this one. So once again, you know, like really bright and strong and, you know, with lots of string noise, lots of aggressiveness on the bottom. And then you've got, you know, warmth and mellowness. You've got extra ring because those bottom strings are ringing in sympathy. Same sort of thing as the Spirocore and Larsen set, but Magnacore and standard Larsen instead. I reckon it's really hard to split those two sets. For me, I find it a little tiny bit easier to get into the strings of the Spirocore, and maybe that's just because that's what I'm used to, because I haven't used the Magnacore very much. But they're both amazing sets, and they both get, like, you know, just thumbs up, just flying everywhere thumbs, which is probably a bad thing, but both awesome sets, and that is the last set for the day. I am sick of changing strings.